So our first question for tonight goes, Dear Ajahn Kalyano, may I know if I am taking a vegetarian diet and if I have eaten some dishes mistakenly thinking it was vegetarian, but it actually wasn't vegetarian. For example, if it was a if it was a spring roll and there was some shrimp inside, I am wondering, should I then continue to finish the dish or throw it away? If I were to throw it away, it seems like um, I may have been clinging to the view of being a vegetarian. This seems to be not a right view, as I know the Buddha didn't teach his disciples to become vegetarian. What would Luang Por suggest?
As Luang Por Sumedho would say, don't make a problem out of it. Life is uncertain, isn't it? It's full of surprises. If you're a monastic, you don't cook your food, you receive food, and you may think something's vegetarian and then find out later on, oh, it's not. It happens, luckily not too often, but it does happen. So I've also crunched into a spring roll that I thought was vegetarian and it wasn't. All kinds of dishes, you find that little bit of meat or fish poking out that you didn't realize was there. So it's up to you. Don't make a problem out of it. Myself, I guess generally, if I notice it's meat when I thought it wasn't meat, I tend to stop eating that dish because I've become so used to not eating meat that I don't really want to eat meat or like meat very much anymore. So I tend to just put it aside. If I can give it to someone else, and I've done that a lot in my monastic life, received a dish of food that was meat-based, but I'm vegetarian, so I just pass it to another monk who eats meat, and they're very happy. And I can even do dana that way. Someone offers meat and I'm not eating it, so I offer it on to someone else. It's a form of dana. That's one option. But like you say, you could practice a bit of letting go and just carry on eating because you've started eating that dish and you realized mistakenly it actually is not vegetarian. So you just carry on eating if you want. And like you say, you could use it as a way to teach yourself to let go of an attachment. It's really up to you, but don't make a problem out of it. It's not the biggest issue in the world. There are bigger things. And these things happen. You have people cook vegetarian dishes in woks and frying pans that have got meat oil or fish oil or something in them, and you can taste it in the vegetarian dish. It happens all the time. So you just have to be ready for that kind of thing. Life is not perfect. You can't always control everything. You do the best you can. But if you're cooking yourself, choosing yourself, well, it's easy. You just make your own vegetarian food if you're in charge. If you're not in charge, you just do the best you can. But don't make a problem out of it. Don't create suffering out of something so small.
Sadhu Luang Por. Next question. Can Luang Por share with us the story of the origins of the Thai forest monk tradition and the contributions of Ajahn Mun and Ajahn Sao? Sadhu.
Oh, how long have you got? There's a few very large books on this subject that you can get from libraries or on the internet. So I'm not sure I could do much justice to the story, but needless to say, Ajahn Mun is considered like the grandfather of the forest tradition in Thailand. But he's by no means the only forest monk, and there were forest monks before him. We just don't know so much about them because they're from an era where there's very little written down, no records, no photographs, and so on. His teacher was Ajahn Sao, was older than him. But in the end, Ajahn Mun progressed quicker than his teacher in the practice, as far as we know. And so the final stages of Ajahn Sao's practice of Dhamma, he was advised by his own student, Ajahn Mun, who kind of went further than him quicker. Anyway, they're both considered to be enlightened monks, very good monks, who had a huge impact on Buddhism in Thailand because they were very energetic, very strong, very wise, and they walked around Thailand because in those days the monks wandered. It's different than nowadays. In those days, Thailand was maybe 85% forest, jungle, 15% urban. Now it's the opposite. Now it's just 10% jungle and 90% urban. And there's very little jungle other than national parks or a few border areas where there's any kind of virgin, undisturbed jungle. There's very little left. So the whole forest tradition has sort of moved into forest monasteries, and the ways of practice have continued, but the actual lifestyle is not so peripatetic and people don't wander around quite so much. But they had a huge influence because they were going into areas where people were not Buddhists. They were what we call animists, spirit worshippers, or other kinds of religious beliefs. And they inspired many, many people in these areas, outlying areas, to become Buddhists, to support Buddhist monks. And they didn't force Buddhism on anyone. They didn't force anyone to convert. It was through their good practice, their peaceful minds, their wisdom, they inspired people. So they had a huge impact on spreading Buddhism in Thailand itself, establishing little hermitages and monasteries, which are now maybe very big monasteries, but in the beginning were just small hermitages. And of course, they had many students, many monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen who learned to meditate from them, and they're very good meditation teachers. So many of their students became enlightened. And, the proof of the teacher is in the student, in the sense that if your students are becoming enlightened, that's a very rare and very amazing thing. So there's a whole tradition now over the last century of forest monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen who have progressed in their practice. Unfortunately, many of them have passed away now, but there are still many who are left. And Ajahn Chah is considered to be one of those students of Ajahn Mun, even though he only spent a short time with him. He was within the forest tradition. He respected Ajahn Mun. He went to study with him briefly and asked questions, received teachings, and met with many other students of Ajahn Mun who knew Ajahn Chah, and they kind of supported each other as Buddhism became more established particularly in northern Thailand, northeast Thailand. The meditation tradition in Thailand isn't restricted or limited just to Ajahn Mun, Ajahn Sao. There's also many other great meditation masters. But, myself, I'm in the lineage of the forest monks, so I talk about them a lot and know them more, some of them firsthand. But there are actually other teachers and other meditation masters who've also had a big impact on Buddhism in Thailand, and particularly the meditation tradition. But one thing, the important thing is, these meditation monks, the forest monks, have spun an era from when forest monks were relatively unknown, not respected, even shunned, or people were suspicious of them. Through their own good practice, it gradually brought the forest tradition into the mainstream, and people have become more and more aware that there are good meditation monks in the forest. They've learned and practiced with them, built monasteries, come in contact with them. So now the forest monks are much more mainstream and accepted, and have had a huge influence in Thailand in Buddhism. And now, of course, in the era of globalization, they've gone overseas, like Ajahn Chah and other monks as well, gone all around the world, teaching Buddhism, teaching meditation. Their students like myself and others have set up monasteries in the West, in non-Buddhist countries. So, it's one of the joys for me as a student of Ajahn Mun, Ajahn Chah, is to see the growth of Buddhism and to see the opportunities to practice that have grown over the years. And, even in my lifetime, when I was a young Buddhist, I had the thought, where on earth can I go to become a monk or practice the Buddhist teachings? This is pre-internet era, hardly any Buddhist books around, no Buddhist monasteries around. You don't see Buddhist monks of the Thai forest tradition in those days. So I had a feeling like I'm too late. I'm not going to be able to practice like this, even though I had some faith in what you might call the forest tradition. But then I started encountering them in Thailand because I traveled to Thailand, and then gradually they've spread around the world. And so people similar to me nowadays are very lucky. You can find monasteries and monks and practitioners in many different corners of the world. The books and the teachings, the recorded teachings are online. So actually it's a golden age in terms of dissemination of the forest tradition, getting to know information, stories, reflections, teachings. The challenge now, though, is to keep up the practice of the forest tradition in the modern era, because the modern era is the modern era. There's technology, there's travel, the forests and jungles are shrinking and disappearing. You go to Thailand, it's very rare you would encounter an elephant or a tiger in the forest in the way that Ajahn Mun, Ajahn Sao did. Not impossible. There's one or two places where they're still around, but very rare. It's very rare that you can wander from place to place in the way they did, staying in forests. All forests has an owner now. So even when I began, it was possible to go and stay in a bit of forest in Thailand, and it would be nominally government forest, but nobody would complain if you went and camped there and maybe even built a simple hut. You could do that. Whereas nowadays you could do that, you may get arrested because it's considered private or government property, crown property, and you shouldn't be doing that without permission. Just as in Australia, you couldn't set up a monastery in a bit of the Yarra Ranges if you didn't have the title deed. If someone didn't buy the land and offer it, you couldn't do that. In the old days, you could. So that's one change. The whole culture, the society has changed a little bit, the administration and the way things are done. Nevertheless, the way of practice hasn't changed. The practice of developing sila, samadhi, panya, samatha vipassana, Dhamma vinaya, that remains the same. And so in our monasteries, even though they're now forest monasteries or in little areas of land, sometimes with not even many trees, the physical location, the physical surroundings may have changed over the decades, but the way of practice hasn't. We still learn the Vinaya, the monastic discipline, and try to keep it sincerely. We learn to meditate, to develop mindfulness using meditation techniques, as I was just explaining earlier. We learn to reflect on impermanence, on not self. Take the teachings of the Buddha and put them to the test through the practice. That hasn't changed. But some of the modern challenges, there are things we have to learn how to cope with as we practice. So I won't tell you the whole story because it's too much, but you can maybe go away and research for yourself and come back if you have any questions. Maybe next time or in future sessions, you can always ask your question and I'll try to answer. But maybe that's enough for now on that one. It's such a big subject. I don't think I can talk too much. Otherwise, I'll be here all night.
Sadhu Luang Por. Another question. Good evening, Ajahn. I want to know that if I have never done any of the Dhutanga practices, such as not lying down to sleep or sitting meditation for several hours, will my Dhamma practice still be advancing?
Well, you have to ask yourself, don't you? We have to self-assess from time to time in our practice what's going on. Am I more peaceful or less peaceful for the practice I've done? Whether you're looking at a period of a few months or a few years, whatever practice you do, just see, is it, what effect is it having on me? Is it helping me to understand the truth and be more peaceful and more at ease in myself as a human being? Because that may be a very kind of clear indication you're going in the right direction if you're more peaceful within yourself, more content, more happy. Or am I still getting really stressed about everything, getting more stressed than I used to be? And then that means maybe your practice is not going very deep, or you need to put a bit more effort in, or make some changes. You have to look at your practice and assess what's going on. Are you getting more greedy, more angry, more worried and anxious, more deluded than before, or less? That's the whole purpose of the practice. That's one way you can measure your practice, whether the mental defilements, the cravings, the attachments are increasing, and consequently suffering and stress will also be coming up, or are they decreasing and the stress and the suffering is abating at least a little bit. We often get upset about the speed of our practice. I want more progress quicker, which is understandable, but it's another problem because we make suffering out of the practice. Nevertheless, you do have to observe if you're becoming more stressed, something's wrong, isn't it? And people do. They meditate and they get angry and they blame the meditation and blame the Buddha, they blame the teacher, the place. Maybe they're missing something. Maybe need to adjust the approach. There's a very common one, isn't it? Dissatisfaction based on the practice. I'm not happy with how my practice is going. I don't do enough. Okay, well, do a bit more. I need to do more dana. Okay, do it. My precepts are not very well kept. Okay, keep them better. You've got to assess and see what you can do to improve. Sometimes you can take bigger steps in your practice. You try harder, you make certain rules and take on certain practices, like you say, Tudonga practices. Other times you take small steps. That's necessary. You can just go a small step at a time. You see what's needed or what works for you. But like you say, you pointed out in your question, you say you haven't sat for hours and hours. Well, you must have sat meditation for a period of time, I assume, or done some walking meditation. If you can sit meditation for 15 minutes without getting up, see if you can extend that to 30 minutes or an hour, and you'll learn something. If you can do walking meditation for 15 minutes, well, extend that. So you may not make huge leaps yet, but see where you can improve your effort in the practice to bring up mindfulness, keep precepts, practice letting go in different ways, cultivate kindness when you're angry or annoyed. Whatever practice your practice requires, see where you can put more effort in.
Sorry. Next question. In the past, when I have stayed in some monasteries, it always seems inevitable to have some lay guests being very opinionated, sometimes aggressive even, or break some rules during their stay, such as telling lies or stealing and eating the monastery food in the afternoon. Some even try to use the monastery as a free hotel or resort. I cannot like these behaviors nor these people. I am about to stay in a monastery soon again for some weeks. And what do I do if I meet people like that again? I am unable to like them, but I also don't think I am in the place to give them my opinions. But seeing people like that does affect my mental well-being. Ajahn, please suggest. Sadhu.
Yeah, well, what you've described is a very common sort of experience, because when anyone comes into a monastery and they're green or untrained, then yeah, they'll display different behaviors that come from mental defilements. Some people are more lazy, some people are more greedy, selfish, some people are more angry, opinionated. So I guess you could look at all these people when you get to the monastery and say, well, I don't want to be like that. If you can see these faults and weaknesses in others, we'll come back to yourself. The first duty might be not to become one of those people who's opinionated about other people. Because if you could see all these other people who are not doing the right thing in the monastery, you will ask yourself, well, am I becoming like that? Or could I become like that? That is maybe your first duty or your first task. So Ajahn Chah always used to say, when we begin practicing, we've always got the statistics wrong. We always like to look at other people and make pronouncements, form opinions, judge other people, and we don't see ourselves. So we're looking at other people 90% of the time and looking at ourselves only 10% of the time. And so we miss a lot. If you only watch yourself 10% of the time, you're going to miss everything. You spend all your time thinking and looking and opinionating about other people. So you have to change the statistics. You've got to look at yourself 90% of the time, and 10% of the time you look at others and you know a little bit about them, but it's not your job to really practice for them or sort them out. They have to learn that for themselves. Your job is to sort yourself out. And that's what the place of practice is for. And so you have to be patient with the fact that when you're new and there's other newcomers around, yeah, they have their opinions, their different behaviors. Just be patient with that. But if you stick with the practice, you'll learn. You will learn what you need to do, which is pay more attention to yourself and less to others. You learn the Dhamma and you try to apply the Dhamma for yourself in your practice. And if you stick with it, you don't give up, you'll learn and you'll grow. And that's what happens, isn't it? Why is Ajahn Sumedho still a monk and a very wise, peaceful monk? Because he didn't quit and he didn't get lost in the opinions and all the competing and comparing with newcomers and new practitioners. He stuck with the practice for a lifetime. So he's been a monk 60 years. And you can see the results. In the end, that's it, isn't it? Whether you're going to keep practicing or you give up. So if you don't give up, you'll gain something from this practice, but be very patient with it and keep learning and observing, and you'll see things improve.
Sadhu Lumpur. Next question. Dear Ajahn, when you mentioned not to create a problem out of it, how can I learn not to create a mole out of a mountain? How to not have such a mentality? This seems to be a part of my personality and character. Seeking your advice. Many thanks.
How can you not create a mole out of a mountain? I'm not sure either. I just went to Chithurst Monastery where they have a lot of moles on the lawn. And the little mole mounds come up in the morning. The original saying is a mountain out of a molehill, but a mole out of a mountain. Something's gone wrong there. But we do it anyway. We attach to different perceptions of right and wrong, good and bad, what we like, what we don't like. And these perceptions, together with craving, feed a lot of mental proliferation. And that's like where things grow or a problem becomes out of nothing. A little problem grows into a bigger problem becomes into an insurmountable mountain, maybe. So Lumpur Sumedho has learned, to use this reflection to help reduce the amount of mental proliferation, criticism, worry, fault finding out of people's experience by saying, well, don't make a problem out of it. So I think we were referring earlier to the vegetarian who finds meat in their food and, oh, what do you do? Well, it's not such a big deal, is it? If you find a bit of meat in your food, you either carry on eating it or you put it aside. End of story. That's the kind of approach where you're not making a mountain out of a molehill. You don't build it up into something bigger than it needs to be. Sure, maybe someone made a mistake and cooked some non-vegetarian food but claimed it was vegetarian or whatever. It could be a mistake, whatever. But don't make a big problem out of it. Don't make it into a big deal in your mind. You can just take that same principle and apply it to so many things, can't you? Whether it's food or life, different aspects of life, your ideals on things, or the way you interact with other people at work or at home. Try not to make the problems that you face anyway worse than they are by letting your mental proliferation and moods take over. And so you get more angry, more frustrated, more sad. This is the practice, isn't it? Learning to be very patient with the difficulties, not to give in to the mental defilements and make things worse than they need to be. That's not making a problem out of it. And if it's helpful to you, you can use that reflection. I've used it many times.
Sadhu Lumpur. Another question. Dear Lumpur, how does greed and craving during meals look like? When I am hungry, the thought of a food I like comes to mind. If I act on the thought and get the item, is it considered craving? When is it considered a craving and when is it not? When should I refrain and when do I go with the thought?
Good question. One thing that helps us through the sort of confusion of living in modern world and things like simple things like eating food, well, the Buddha gave us many reflections. So one of the monastic reflections for eating is, you might say the question is, why do I eat? Well, wisely reflecting, I use alms food, or I just use food if you're at home, not for fun, not for pleasure, not for beautification, not for sport, only for the maintenance and nourishment of this body, for keeping it healthy, for us as monks, for helping with the holy life, or for as a layperson, for helping you lead your life following the Dhamma, but maybe working and running a family as well. But for your practice, you eat the food. And I will eat mindfully, wisely, without overeating, because if you overeat, you increase painful feelings of overeating. You may have accompanying problems if you overeat and you put on weight or you get certain illnesses. So you learn to reflect on food like this, whether you're a monastic or a layperson. It's a very simple reflection and it's very helpful. Having reflected, well, you can still eat food that you like, because quite often food you like is what you're used to, and it will help you to live your life and do the things you need to do. So it's not that a Buddhist practicing the Buddhist path always has to not eat the food they like because they're afraid they're going to be following craving. But just be aware of the danger. When you eat food you like, you may have craving arise. So try to keep alert and observe that. And when you notice the craving, try to let it go through mindfulness, patience, discipline. And sure, if you notice you have a weakness for a certain kind of food, well, maybe you avoid it to help calm your mind. You give your mind something better to eat, something that's less agitating, less exciting, doesn't excite you so much. Sometimes meditators do that. They eat very simple food because they find too much rich food, exotic food or whatever stirs the mind up and stirs the body up too. You learn what is the right amount, the right kind of food. And again, try not to make too much of a problem out of it because you've got to eat every day. So you can't just stop eating, but try to have a wise attitude to eat mindfully and understand, even the most delicious food is still just a temporary thing. You just eat the meal and then it's finished. And you can often reflect on the impermanence of food. It's a very good one. reflect on the people who offer the food if you're a monk, or even the food you eat at home. You reflect on the fact someone had to grow that, produce that food. Be more aware of the sort of interlinked nature of our society, so we're not just thinking of ourselves all the time. There's many different aspects to the reflection, but you use wise reflection to help you deal with the challenge of living in the world and eating food, as you might say. And there's different aspects of life that are like that, aren't they? We have to learn to wisely reflect on the way we use material things, the way we interact with the world, our jobs, our families, social things. All of this can be a basis for wise reflection, mindful behavior, good behavior, and we incorporate it into our practice.
Sadhu Lumpur. Next question. Lumpur, there's so many teachers out there now. How do we know that this teacher is the right one?
Maybe I'm not the best one to ask because I only ever had one teacher, Ajahn Chah. I'm lucky I met Ajahn Chah first, so I stuck with him. When he died, I was also fortunate to know Ajahn Anand, so I went to live with Lumpur Anand. So I've been lucky. One way you can do it is make a wish, a strong wish, what we call an adhitthana, a determination in your mind to meet a good teacher of the good Dhamma, what we call a Kalyana Mitta. You start there maybe, make a wish in your meditation, in your practice, make this wish, make this resolution as a starting point. But you may also have to be a bit active. The best way to know a teacher, I'd say, is meet them in person. You maybe meet them online or in writings in a book or something first. Go and meet them, make the effort to go and find them if they're alive, obviously. Go and find them. That can help, can't it? You meet the teacher, you may not be able to spend all your time with them or meet them that often, but if you met someone in person, that may give you confidence, or maybe the opposite. Maybe it just turns you off. Well, okay, well, that solves that problem. Not that teacher for you. You have to go and find another one. The way you can judge a teacher, I guess, is whether they're teaching the true Dhamma according to what the Buddha taught. So you also have to read a bit and prepare yourself. So get to know what the Noble Eightfold Path is, some of the basic Buddhist concepts, Dhamma, Vinaya. If it's a monastic teacher, a monk or a nun, well, are they keeping their rules, practicing properly? That's one simple reflection. How do you feel when you're with that teacher? Do you feel peaceful? Do the things they say make sense? Like when I met Ajahn Chah, I immediately felt peaceful. And that's a tangible feeling. It's not just, a momentary sort of elation because everyone else is going, oh, this is the teacher. I was actually very quiet. Ajahn Chah wasn't speaking and no one else was speaking. And I sat there and I had an amazing feeling of peace come towards me, and it seemed to emanate from him. So feelings can help. Use your eyes. Ajahn Chah said he did that when he went to see Ajahn Mun. He used his eyes. You look at the teacher, how they live, their monastery, or if they're a lay teacher, their center or their place of teaching, their home. How do they live? How is it set up? What do they do there? How do they conduct themselves? There's a lot you can learn just observing, quietly observing. Partly through reputation as well. If other people say this teacher is really good, well, it's not absolute guarantee, but it's a start. Maybe that's true. Maybe not. Maybe they got it wrong. You go and prove for yourself by meeting the teacher, living with them, studying with them, practicing with them. So for some people, it's a gradual getting to know of the teacher. Sometimes it's quick, but you have to make that effort. You can't just sit there and expect a teacher to drop into your lap out of nowhere. It's not going to happen.
Lumpur. Another question. Dear Lumpur, is it possible to have more than one teacher? Not many, but very few teachers. Thank you.
Well, it is in the sense you can probably learn a lot from many different people, teachers, and sometimes people who don't consider themselves teachers can still be wise and give you some good advice or be a good example. So I would keep your mind open. And over the years, you probably hear in my Dhamma talks, I've lived with a few different Dhamma teachers, and I've also met many. And I enjoy meeting good Dhamma teachers, even if I never live with them, I just meet them. Still, you can find that inspiring, learn something. Maybe they say something that's relevant to you personally, or more general teachings. They may live in an inspiring way or an inspiring place. There's different things that can help you when you meet teachers. And sometimes it's a bit like doctors, isn't it? You have an illness, you go to a doctor, and then you're still doubting, the procedure they've suggested, the medication they've suggested, I'm not sure. Is this really the right way to go? So you go for a second opinion. And maybe the second opinion matches the first opinion, so then you get confidence. Oh, yeah, they all seem to say the same thing. That's one thing I found with Dhamma teachers, like visiting different monks who they may have a slightly different personality or present the Dhamma slightly differently, but they say very similar things or point you to the same things. So you get some confidence that there's a certain path and there's something in common that they have that maybe indicates maybe they've had similar realizations, the way they explain Dhamma, what they say you need to do in order to free yourself from suffering. You get confidence by visiting other teachers, and they kind of reinforce or confirm what you've already learned from your first teacher. So sometimes it's like that. You don't have to endlessly be seeking teachers, but sometimes you get a new insight into something, a different angle, a different approach that can be helpful. Or sometimes it's just confirmation of what you've already known and heard, but the confirmation is also helpful. You have to be the one who makes the effort again. But if you have one teacher, that teacher is enough for you, okay, lucky you, good for it, good for you, go for it.
Are there any more questions? And there's one more here. Lumpur, is being psychic acceptable?
What do you do if you're psychic? If it's unacceptable, you're stuck. Are we going to have ban the psychics? They put them in prison, banish them. Some people are psychic. It's just a fact of life. You just have to accept it. But it's what they do with it probably is more important. Some people meditate and they get psychic knowledge. Sometimes occasional, a little bit. Some people seem to get a lot. Sometimes usually it's to do with the skill of their meditation. So some people have been practicing maybe many lifetimes, so they regain knowledges life after life, and they just have those knowledges. You can't deny it. You can ignore them, of course. It's your choice. If you don't like psychics, well, ignore them. But some people have that knowledge. But of course, there are also a lot of people who are lost, faking it, lost in their imagination, misunderstanding things, not that wise. Maybe pursuing, they like the idea of being a psychic, so they're trying to project that image to others. I'm a psychic, but for more greedy or selfish motives. There are those people as well. So you do have to be careful and a little bit skeptical sometimes, and that's all right. Healthy skepticism is helpful in the practice. You can question things, that's all right. But there are genuine ones as well, probably small in number, but they are there. So you don't want to just reject them. I would just recommend keeping an open mind. And often psychic knowledge is not that useful to you. If someone else says, "Oh, there's this guy who can see the dead, talk to ghosts or something." Well, good, okay, but it may not be that relevant to you personally in your practice. So it's just something you're aware of. Oh yeah, there's that, but maybe it doesn't matter to you so much. And you don't need to form an opinion. I believe, I don't, I like it, I don't. You just let them get on with their life and you get on with yours. But at the same time, if you practice meditation and you have some psychic phenomena or ability or a vision or something arise yourself, you've got to deal with that. You can't just reject it out of hand if it's happened. So sometimes it is useful to know somebody who has that ability, who you trust or is trusted in the community, because they can give you some advice what to do if you have that experience yourself. And as I said, it does happen in meditation. People sometimes have visions, knowledges, prophetic dreams. They have visions or insights into themselves based on psychic knowledge. They have insight into other people, beings, see other beings in other realms, understand karma a bit more. There are those individuals, or there are ordinary individuals who sometimes have those experiences. So I just try and keep an open mind and try and learn, but also be aware of the danger that we can get very drawn into that way of thinking. It's fascinating, and we can get lost in it, exaggerate it, get deluded by it, form a sense of self around psychic knowledge, so that I am the one who can see the devas, or I am the one who knows the future, and that becomes somebody's personality, and the attachment to that kind of knowledge can happen as well. So be careful. Keep an open mind, be cautious, and as Ajahn Chah said, it's all not sure. Maybe they know, maybe they don't know. Maybe what I've seen is true, maybe what I've seen is not true. It's not sure. So you keep an open mind, then you're on safe ground. If you rush to believe something, well, maybe later you find out it's not true and you're very disappointed or hate yourself or very upset or cause some trouble even. Sometimes people believe someone who's a psychic. Probably the most common one that plays on people's desires is there's some monk or nun who claims they can tell whether you're enlightened or not, or what level of enlightenment you've attained, or whether you've attained samadhi or not, or what level of samadhi. And generally, the people with this genuine, real knowledge, they don't talk too much, certainly not to strangers. They're pretty private and careful what they say. Whereas some people who are not so careful what they say, usually they're not so pure in their motivation, or they're more deluded, or they're just trying to make a name for themselves. And these people come along for a while. Often they make a big splash, in the Buddhist community or something. Oh, this person can tell you whether you're a sotapanna or not. And so everyone goes there for a while. And then quite often they kind of, in Thailand, they call them shooting stars or meteors. They come up very fast and then they burn out and disappear again. I've seen over the years so many people like that. And they seem to have maybe they do have some psychic knowledge to start with. And then they get famous and lots of people come, and then something goes wrong. And they run away and get married, or they disrobe if they're a monastic, or they get too addicted to money and praise and fortune, or something goes wrong. Quite common, because they don't have the wisdom, and maybe they don't have the purity in their sila either. So be careful. This kind of phenomena is quite common. But of course, there are those who do have pure sila, pure intention, wise, and have developed psychic ability through their samadhi. They do exist as well. So don't always underestimate people either. That happens sometimes. People go to a monk and they say, "Oh, I don't believe he knows anything," because they don't display it. And if you don't display something, people assume you don't have it. But maybe they do. It's just they don't display it to you, and you have to accept that. But be careful not to put someone down or criticize them simply because you've heard they have psychic knowledge or they're enlightened or something, and you go and you don't feel they are what other people have said. Don't rush, jump to conclusions, because often the enlightened person doesn't display a lot of special knowledge, or they don't do anything special. They're just very ordinary because their mind is pure and undefiled. They have no sense of self or attachment. Often they're very kind of humble and ordinary. So if you're going to find this amazing teacher with all these psychic powers and enlightened knowledge, you're going with the wrong attitude, and you're hoping and looking for something special. You want them to help you out of your problems. You want them to kind of pass or give you the transmission, or do some amazing feat or miracle. So if they're just sitting there and they don't do that, doesn't necessarily mean they don't have that ability. May mean they don't have that ability, but maybe they do, but they just don't display it. So don't jump to conclusions, because over the years that's happened as well. Some very good teachers who are very pure, wise beings, someone goes there and not impressed because they didn't do any special miracle for them. So they go away criticizing them, putting them down, and make a lot of bad karma for themselves. So keep your mind kind of in the middle, the open mind. Some people do have psychic ability, some don't. If you don't know, it doesn't matter. Just keep your mind in the middle, keep an open mind. I would say that's standing on safe ground, and be aware that everything is not sure. And with that, we'll end the Q&A session tonight.
So